All right. All right. Just in the interest of time, we'll get started. I know people will keep trickling in, but we're also recording this podcast, and we'll have this available as a podcast after this panel. First of all, I'd like to welcome every one of you to our Community of Practice event. We have a very exciting conversation today. We're going to be talking about the Entrepreneur of Color Fund that the DEC Network has worked on along with JPMorgan Chase and other partners to launch for the city of Dallas. We have a couple exciting panelists joining us along with Tarsha from the DEC Network. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody, but I'm very excited for the conversation today. Let me just quickly introduce the panel. First, we have Tarsha Hearns, who's a Senior Director for the DEC Network in Dallas, Texas. I'm not going to read the full bio, and I'll let Tarsha kind of talk about her mission and what she's looking to get done. I'll just introduce everybody, but I'd love for you all to come back and kind of talk about your work and what you're looking to get done. Next up, we have Holly Burrow, who's the CEO and founder of Equal Business Solutions, also based in Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Holly. And then third, we have Kay West, who's the VP and Market Manager for the Texas True Fund Financial Services, overseeing Texas and initiatives in North Louisiana. Welcome, panelists. First off, I'll have you, Tarsha, just introduce yourself and a little bit about the DEC Network and the work that you're doing there.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much, David, for having me and for all the work that you've been doing with our organization for the past 9 months now. Again, I'm Tarsha Hearns, Senior Director for the DEC Network, which stands for Dallas Entrepreneur Center. We are a nonprofit organization that provides business support resources such as accelerator programs, pitch competitions, and we do that to support the entrepreneurs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We are located, our main entrepreneur center is located in one of the largest neighborhoods in Dallas, which is called Oak Cliff. And so I'll be talking more about that, but that's about the DEC Network.
Thank you, Tarsha. Holly, over to you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And as you mentioned, I run a company called Equal Business Solutions, and we partner with organizations like the DEC to be able to help build capacity and be able to serve early stage entrepreneurs and help them understand how to build a business, how to access capital, and how to grow into what they dream it can be. So we work with them one-on-one, advisory services, and we also build programs in collaboration with the organizations that we support.
Awesome. Thank you. Kay?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kay West. I serve as the VP for True Fund Financial Services. We're based in New York, but we do have a footprint in the Texas area. Our markets consist of the DFW area as well as Houston. And we're here to serve small businesses. We provide low-cost loans to small business owners, anywhere from $50,000 to $300,000. And then we also have new markets tax credit products. We find that our products are fairly flexible to really support small business owners, as well as providing that support outside of just your ordinary day products that banks may have. So we also provide bonding, as well as products that could really help increase credit scores for small businesses. And so we're here to build capacity and work with organizations like Holly's and Tarsha's to really, really meet the needs of the underserved community here in the DFW area.
Thank you, Kay. I'm really looking forward to this discussion because we've got three unique perspectives here. We've got somebody that's got the core business support organization and kind of convener role with the DEC Network. We've got Holly with can put on both the business owner hat and being able to think of it as a support organization, getting businesses ready to be able to apply for financial products. And then Kay, we've got you bringing in the CDFI perspective to say, when you're looking to fund businesses, what are you looking for? And I think this can be a very interesting conversation, and it'll build on some of the work that the DEC Network has been doing in Dallas over the past 4.5 years, along with a lot of other partners funded through some major organizations. So I'll start, Tarsha, by kind of having you provide some background, because a lot of the people that are listening to this today and will be listening to this are really looking for kind of what does a roadmap look like for bringing such a conversation to their markets first, and then being able to also implement something like this long term as a solution for their underrepresented businesses. So I'll ask first, Tarsha, what was the motivation for the DEC Network to say this is something that we want to invest time and resources to want to solve for Dallas?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Really, this is a follow-up project. Back in 2019, there was a study conducted around the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Dallas. And in that study that was conducted, there were several gaps that were identified specifically for the southern sector of Dallas. And it uncovered that there were several needs that needed to be addressed for entrepreneurs. Capital was one of them, building an ecosystem was one of them. Also providing quality business support, such as mentoring, training, and access to resources. So this, and here we are, what, 5 years later, the DEC decided to follow up with that study and work closely with JPMorgan Chase, who funded the initial study, to now focus on looking at that one particular gap, which is access to capital. So this project, even though we have been working with all of our ecosystem partners over the last 9 months, but this has actually been an initiative that has been in the works for several years with a collaborative of organizations across the Metroplex.
So in terms of why now, what was the motivation to say we need to solve this now? What was the motivation to say, it's been a problem forever? What was the thing that said, okay, this problem needs a real solution?
Yeah, I think timing is always, very important. I mean, coming out of COVID and the whole world seeing how entrepreneurs of color were just kind of left behind, getting access to PPP, and those entrepreneurs of color who didn't even have the proper paperwork or even resources or acumen to even go after that. So I think coming out of that and seeing how those communities got hit the hardest by COVID really just opened up our eyes even wider to know that now is the time. Now that, COVID is past us and we are fully back in business, now is just the time to focus on closing that gap and identifying real solutions that an ecosystem can implement.
Yeah. Holly, let me bring you into this discussion. As a small business owner yourself, you're acutely aware of the needs that capital is such an important component of staying in business, but also as a support organization where you help businesses get financially ready. Tell us a little bit about what were your perspectives as you went through and were part of the focus groups leading up to today. What were your takeaways from doing this project?
So some of my takeaways are kind of the same takeaways I had from the entrepreneur journey that I personally had of going in and not understanding why I got rejected for things. Some of the same things that have happened to me are some of the stories that we've been able to hear and start to be able to address some of the situations with. So I think that's my key takeaway, is that the stories that we keep hearing, the things that we keep understanding, the more that we talk to entrepreneurs, the more we understand about what they need and how to be able to provide the best resources for that. Our initial instincts were correct. Like they were not incorrect. We just need to build better channels and better ways to be able to deliver it to the audience that needs to be able to utilize them. And that's the key. The biggest takeaway that I had from it is we've got to figure out how to get the opportunity to take advantage of this in front of the appropriate audience so that they can really, really capitalize on it and use this opportunity to grow their businesses.
Yeah, thank you. And Kay, I'll also bring you into this discussion here about when you look at it from a CDFI perspective. I think that all the CDFIs we talked to also said that they're acutely aware of this problem, right? What is your perspective on, especially a market like Dallas, this solution being a way to kind of solve for traditionally businesses being rejected at a high rate?
So I do agree with Holly and Tarsha. And I would also say this: it takes time to create funds of the size that the DEC is trying to create, and it also takes, the banking institutions and private institutions to really understand the need and to fit their guidelines around those needs. And that takes time to change because they may have dollars allocated one year to the next, and they haven't really changed their rules around how they want to fund small businesses. And we've seen that change drastically after COVID, right? The banks are starting to understand that they need to change their guidelines to fit the needs of the underserved community. And that's taken more time than what we have hoped. But I think, I'm optimistic because we have people at the table now who are now saying we're changing our guidelines to fit the needs of the community. And that's matching dollars where small businesses need the opportunity to be viable. I would say also, as we see the communities change and the need to inject capital in the communities, not just for development projects, but the pre-development, the amount of time that it takes and the parameters around the pre-development process for a small business, them understanding the technical piece of what they need to ask the banks, that's a part of the support that the BSOs are now offering, because it was a checkbox before. Can you come to us? Do you have a business plan? Can I help you with the business plan? But now it's also understanding what the cities need from the small business owners to even start or even to operate within the parameters of a building or a place. And then it also takes the BSOs understanding that and being able to support them there. So those gaps have now been closed in. And I think that's momentum. We're seeing the alliance and the coalitions of the community, the banking, the private institutions all coming together saying, let's figure this out for small businesses. And that's where the CDFIs are able to plug in and support on the capital access needs.
Yeah, go ahead, Tarsha.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because she's making a really good point, and what she's talking about is what we, even in the first study, it identified there wasn't an ecosystem here in Dallas, right? And so that first study, that was the first thing that collaborative decided to work on, is establishing the Dallas Build ecosystem to address those things. And even following up with the study that we're doing, we're seeing how important it is for each ecosystem member to understand not only what the entrepreneur needs, but what the members of the ecosystem needs and what the ecosystem is lacking. So in the study that we conducted with you, David, we saw that some of the business support organizations weren't even educated around how to refer a borrower, a potential borrower, how to vet them. Many of them don't even understand the 5 C's of credit. So therein lies a whole layer of issues in itself that is contributing to this gap in capital.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly.
Well, and I think that Kay kind of touched on something that became really acutely aware to me a few years ago. I had the opportunity to work with a different CDFI during COVID to help with PPP. And something that became really obvious to me in that journey was that we're not doing the right connecting of dots. So what Kay mentioned was like, we're not teaching entrepreneurs how to plug into what the city needs and how do you understand what the economic development spaces are looking for and how can they help and all of these things. The entrepreneurs need sort of a hand to hold to be able to support them through that learning curve. And traditionally, that's not something that's present in the lending space because they don't have the time or the bandwidth to be able to support that learning curve. So it just didn't exist. And so not only were borrowers being denied, they then were not able to capitalize on any of the other resources that more experienced entrepreneurs in spaces actually know exist, and they know that they can go to them for support. They didn't even know they were there. So it's a matter of not even knowing what questions to ask and then no guideposts there to be able to help with that. So I think that Kay brought that up and I thought it was a really good point to double click on too.
Yeah, and I'll continue on this vein. Tarsha, if you want to kind of just tell us a couple other things that stood out, right? Just to kind of level set before we jump into the solutions, what were some other things that were like, wow, like we know it, but to see it in the data, then you're like, okay, now we can't ignore it. It's out there, right? What were some other things that were in the findings that were like really momentum builders? We're like, okay, now we got to go solve this. Like, I remember we had like a conversation with the funders who are like, yeah, we want to see the outcome. And then when they saw the outcome, they're like, okay, we got to do something about it now.
Yeah. Just like Holly, I too worked for a CDFI. I too have been an entrepreneur. And so you know these things because this is the world you live in, right? Because you either experience it yourself or you've worked with someone or tried to help someone who's experienced it. But some of the things that really stuck out, that one that I already knew was the high number of entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs of color, that were declined by CDFIs. So again, having worked for one, I saw that internally, but seeing it collectively across 5 different CDFIs, having seen that 53% of entrepreneurs of color were declined by a nonprofit lender, that blew my mind. So that was one thing that stood out. And then the other one was the fact that over 50% of the people surveyed in this study who needed a loan, wanted to apply for a loan, but didn't because they felt like they would be declined. So those were the 2 things that really stood out for me. And it's very personal for me because as an entrepreneur myself, just like Holly said, I've I needed funding at one point, and I was just so afraid that 1, I didn't want to take on the debt, and number 2, wasn't even sure that they would fund me. So it's very personal, but it's also disturbing to actually see those numbers that come back from those entrepreneurs that were surveyed.
Yeah. And I'll have Holly react to this. Holly, the other one that we found was that people did not know why they were declined, which was and that was over 50% of people did not know why they were declined. And that was at the heart of the problem, because if you didn't know why you declined, there's no way you're going to actually get better. And when we shared that even with banks, they were not surprised. They were like, yeah, we have a generic letter we send out. We don't tell them why. What's your reaction to that? In that, how do you fix a problem that you don't know exists?
How do you fix a problem you don't know exists? I resonate with it loudly personally because I have a personal story that I'm sure everyone on the panel has heard me tell, but I'll tell it again just for everyone else that hasn't heard it. Is as an entrepreneur, first business I ever owned, had an opportunity to grow, needed to go into the bank and access some capital. First time I went into the bank, they literally laughed at me. It was an absolutely horrifying experience. I never went back. I was incredibly scrappy. I figured out how to do what I needed to do. I sold my car. I did all the things that entrepreneurs do to be able to make things happen. But I never actually knew why I was turned down until that opportunity to work with the CDFI a few years back, and I was able to sort of sit on the other side of the table. And it dawned on me that the reason that I had been declined was not because I had a lot of things in order, and I had at least some glimpse of what I needed to do, but I had done things in the wrong order. And I would never, ever, ever have known that had I not been able to sit on the other side of that table and see how important that order of operations was. So something as simple as that. And so the opportunity for me to be able to go out and support entrepreneurs learning about this process has been like it lights me on fire and gets me excited every single morning, because it is the change that we need to make. Is they need to understand the intricacies of how these processes work, so that they can avoid really silly pitfalls like doing things in the wrong order. Like that makes no sense, that that's a reason I couldn't grow my business. And why didn't anyone tell me that? Why did someone choose to laugh at me instead of telling me, hey, you did this in the wrong order. Please go out, try this again in 3 months, and let's continue the conversation. Like, this is just a crazy situation. So how do you solve a problem you don't know exists? You can't. So we have to change that cycle and that pattern for sharing that information.
Okay, I'll let you go. I'll ask you one more question, Kay, to answer with your comments. I'll ask you one thing. So the third thing we found, Kay, was that businesses did not apply because they thought they would not be approved. So eventually what ended up happening was that people just kind of self-selected out of the process because they're like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother my time with this. I'm not even going to apply. So then what ended up happening was that people just kind of were disenfranchised from the process itself. And so if you're doing something like this, how do you go back and say, no, we're trying something out, believe us now, right? So yeah, share your thoughts, Kay, and then also would love to get your feedback on that. Was another surprising finding for us, was that there was a majority of businesses that just did not apply because they didn't think they'd be approved.
So I want to answer this in a way that does not take away from anybody, but also answers it in a way that I feel like is an accurate perspective. And so, historically, most of the people from the banks, were not people of color. And so, redlining is a real thing. Historically, as the banks have changed and have become more, I believe, inclusive in their own practices and establishments, I think we've seen some diversity. But the truth of the matter is, when one of those people historically has been in the institution and they go to the next institution, they carry some of those same biases, prejudice with them. And it's unfortunate, but it's this historical thing. And the same thing with CDFIs. When one person leaves one CDFI, they go to another CDFI, they hold some of those same practices and biases. And it's unfortunate, but it's taken some time to kind of rid these organizations of these types of practices. And I would say, like the conversation that we were able to have yesterday with the FDIC, that was a great conversation, to be in a room full of banks and ask them tangible questions as to their lending practices. One of which is, if you have your sign outside of a project, of a development project for funding, and this is not an equitable practice, this is a one-off thing, how do the rest of small businesses know this is something that you don't fund? Or how do you even share, that information with them of their lending criteria up front? Because each bank has CDFIs have their own criteria in which they process the underwriting piece. And so learning that up front, it's helpful to the small business. The more we're able to bridge the gap on the relationship piece. Relationship banking has become a huge thing now, not just for the big banks who can afford to do it, even for the small hometown banks. We really have to hone in, even as a CDFI, on the relationships within the community. And so that's why we're focused on South Dallas, because we're tracking impact, but we also, in order for us to make the impact, we have to have boots on the ground. We have to have our people present, knowing the projects, knowing the small business owners, knowing what's happening, what's coming down the pipeline. And then it goes hand in hand with some of the other things that's going on in the community. So as the community develops, we want to be there, not to displace people, But we want the small mom and pop shops to be there. We want to fund those small businesses who are not a major retail chain. We want to have that placemaking within communities. And in order for us to do that, we have to know what's going on in the community and build relationships with people. I think that's a huge part of it. You can't sit behind a desk in banking or even a CDFI and know what's going on in the community. You have to go out and build a relationship. So I would answer that way. And then I would also say building trust in the community is a real thing. We have our own fears, like Tarsha said, and you're fearful and you don't even know why. And you want to build that relationship and you don't know how. But when the banks and the CDFIs come into the community and they make their presence known, that's a part of that building relationships piece that, you know, is sustainable. You know, you build a relationship and they may not be ready today. 6 months from now, they may be ready. And that's what we want to see, that transition from the institution to the boots on the ground to the actual lending. It has to be a relationship that makes that happen.
Well, I'll share a fact we found in the study that 100% backs that. So guess which entity had the highest rate of funding to people of color? It was credit unions, which makes sense. A lot of these credit unions are building relationships into the community. They provided loans at a higher rate than CDFIs to people of color, which also was mind-blowing for us. But again, nobody thought it was surprising. They just felt like the data validated, and it's exactly like you said. Those credit unions have those relationships and they know what these business owners are up to, and they can have that more intimate relationship where they can actually fund a business knowing that it's not just about the numbers, right? There's a whole trust built into it. Tarsha, go ahead. And as part of the Tarsha, could you also then tell us kind of the recommendations for the study as part of your response?
Yeah. So just to add to what Kay was saying, we have a member at our Redbird Center, which is a co-working space and where we house entrepreneurs and do programming. I personally referred one of our members to our local CDFI partner. That individual spent about 90 days working with that CDFI to 90 days later being turned down, and not even told why they were turned down. It was troubling for me because I gave the referral, but it was very discouraging and disappointing for the entrepreneur. And eventually this entrepreneur was referred to a small credit union where he was able to get his $150,000 loan to purchase more vehicles and for working capital. And so I tell that story because if it were not for a relationship with that banker at that small credit union, it's very likely that the entrepreneur would have just said, you know what, forget it, I'm going to bootstrap, I'm going to charge up all my credit cards, which eventually is not a good thing. So, you know, that is one of the outcomes that we're trying, or actually one of the barriers that we're trying to remove is, one is helping entrepreneurs to understand why they were declined. And to Holly's point, there has to be some education from a perspective of this is exactly what the funder is looking for. And so let's reverse engineer our approach to start with educating. If the goal is access to capital, then understand what the funders are looking for, understanding what those barriers are, and then educating all involved around. So if it means establishing relationships between all of the ecosystem partners so that they have those trusted connectors, that's one thing. Another outcome that we're looking at is actually training business support organizations in the area. So that's a huge outcome as well. The other outcome that we're looking at is, and this is to what Kay said, it's great that she was in the room with FDIC, right? talking about redlining, talking about changing the rules of engagement, because that's one of the huge outcomes that we're looking to put a major dent in. It may take time to change fully and do a 360, but if we can kind of move the needle 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, I think that is a major outcome for this, is to look at how, as a community who all say we really want to change and remove the barriers and level the playing field, how can we come up with an affordable loan product or a solution that everyone can come on board with to close that access to capital gap?
Yeah, I'll kind of just share a couple more things that we saw in the recommendations, and then would love to get, Holly, your reaction and Kay's reaction as well. Of course, the thing that you all have talked about, which is that how do you rebuild trust? And how do you rebuild trust where you bring in the community support organizations, you bring in the churches, the religious institutions, the local watering holes, if you will, right? The places where people go to, so that you can actually rebuild the trust and say that, okay, you know, you might have been rejected before, but this time we're going to be a lot more intentional. Even if there is a no, there is a process through which you can come back and be able to be capital ready. So that was one. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the fund. So the recommendation to have a fund and being really creative about not just creating another loan product in the Dallas market. There are 9 CDFIs. We don't need more capital. We need capital that can actually solve the problem. And so how do you build a design? How do you design a product that all of the current funders can play in, but at the same time, it can move the needle on making capital more accessible for people of color? Tarsha talked about the technical assistance for BSOs, and how do you kind of train the BSOs to be more targeted in getting those businesses capital ready. Another interesting thing that in the focus groups we found was that there wasn't information sharing between the various organizations that support a business owner. So a business owner might go to one CDFI, have one conversation, go to another business support organization, but because those two organizations don't talk, they might not even be working on the same things, or they might hear 2 different responses from 2 different CDFIs. So how do you have a coordinated approach so that the business owner is at the center of the solution that's being created? Then thinking about outreach, what does marketing look like? Because one of the things that the focus groups also talked about is that if you're not in the community itself, then business owners are not going to trust you. So how do you actually create marketing that brings you into the community? And a lot of the conversations is around access. How do you create access to resources for business owners? And then the last 2 things were around a digital navigation toolkit. So if there are 9 CDFIs and other BSOs, how does a business owner know how to navigate this easily? And then the last one was around, and I think a lot of this are already in play or being built right now, formal accelerator programs you could go through so that you can become financially ready, or like you're too early for capital. What does an accelerator or a pre-accelerator look like that gets you financially ready? So Holly, looking at these recommendations, and you've been part of the task force, the focus groups, you've had your hands and knees deep in this. What are some of these solutions that excite you as well, and things that you think we should be focusing on?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll start by kind of touching on we stand at a really interesting juncture point because of what we do as a company. We're able to support many of the different BSOs and CDFIs within this geographic space. And so we bring to the table this very unique perspective of, we know which entrepreneurs are working with all of them. And we end up hearing the stories of all of the sort of cross-hatched information that they're getting, and some of that sort of mess that gets accidentally made because, and it's all rooted in a lack of trust. And so I think like that the core of the problem is that we need to do a better job of being able to build that trust, because if these entrepreneurs trusted the resources that were being put in front of them, they would be more transparent about the fact that they're working with multiples of them. And they would be able to capitalize on the resources that are there at a more full rate, because then they can get this from over here and that from over there, instead of accidentally simply doubling down on some of the same resources again and again, and getting sort of an insufficient education because they're not able and don't feel that they can trust the spaces to tell them that they're doing all of these different activities, accelerators, programs. And so we kind of stand at an interesting juncture and can help bridge some of those gaps in between with knowledge, because we're able to build those trusted relationships. We are an organization of all entrepreneurs serving entrepreneurs, and we focus on the one-on-one conversations. And so that's really where some of that trust is being able to be built, is because we have the time and the bandwidth to be able to sit down with them and address all of the insecurities and the worries and the things that they don't feel comfortable voicing right when you shake their hand. You have to have that time and that runway to be able to build the relationship before they feel comfortable saying that they're worried about something or that they need a particular resource.
Yeah, Tarsha, jump in.
Yeah, just continuing on the trust conversation, we have the trust issue between the entrepreneur, the CDFI, and the BSOs, but we also have that trust issue between the BSOs and other BSOs, and when I say BSOs, I mean business support organizations, and CDFIs. And so we even had these discussions when we were doing the focus groups for this study. And I think a lot of the lack of trust start from the level of BSO to BSO, BSO to CDFI. The lack of trust is because of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, right? So in my example that I just gave, the fact that I sent over a client to a CDFI, they worked with them for 90 days, turned them down. I'm not going to trust sending another client to that CDFI. However, if I were educated up front around what their practices were, what their guidelines were, I would have never sent that entrepreneur to that CDFI. And so there is where some of those trust issues start, is strictly around, hey, I just don't have a clear understanding of what you do and how to refer and what you're looking for to approve an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, Tarsha said it, the training piece for BSOs and even ESOs is so important, because the biggest gap in the entrepreneur obtaining a loan and the disconnect between the business support organizations is actually the products and services that they're offering. And so the more the BSOs can be trained on the packaging piece, I think that's the biggest gap, the packaging piece, getting their tax documentation together. The mixers are fine, the networking events are fine, but if you're not helping that small business package their information, you're really missing the needle. And that's where the CDFIs, the lending institutions are coming back to say, let's build strategic partnerships. So with True Fund, we've moved away from some of our cohort style training because it was a catch-all. We serve second stage businesses, and for some of those cohorts, you have entrepreneurs who just starting out or don't even have a clue as to what they want to do with their business and don't even have a business plan come to some of our events, and then they're not ready. So how can we partner with an organization like the DEC or even Holly's organization to say, okay, this is our lending products. This is who we fund, and this is how we get them ready. The more we can do that and then train other BSOs on that piece, I think we'll close a huge gap, because what's happening right now, there's a lot of funding available for BSOs, and even there's competition, right? And that's why a lot of them fall out, because they're competing for the same programs. And then when one gets left out, it's like, I've done all this work and I don't have any funding to actually do the work. The more we can include them on these funding initiatives, build collaborations and train them, and also incentivize them to do the work, that's where we're going to build that connectivity. And we're on the technical assistance piece by being strategic and focusing on the packaging piece.
Love it. Go ahead, Holly.
I utterly resonate with that. And I will say that one of the things that I really wanted to mention is because of the position that we hold and the way that we are able to support both the spaces and the entrepreneurs, the thing that I want to come across loud and clear is we need more transparency between the organizations, because what we've been able to do is, and unbeknownst to many of the organizations, because we work with so many of them, is we're able to sort of massage what each one is offering because we're helping build it. And so we're sort of able to stop that duplication of things. And so it's been something since we've begun this company, that's been a goal, is to stop some of this duplication of effort and have conversations and say, okay, you at this CDFI, you're building a program. We know that the DEC already has this program. Why don't we build a referral process for that? And let's build something else, so that we're stopping this constant rotation of the exact same information being shared. And one of the really cool things that we've been able to do in the last year is build some, exactly what Kay mentioned, is we've been working with some CDFIs and some banks to build some process and online education that actually walks entrepreneurs through that process of preparing and packaging, so that the first time they're hearing it isn't when they're going to apply. And so being able to sort of reach that barrier and present that information in terms of this is literally exactly how you prepare to do this before you're actually going and doing it has been a real game changer. So there's the transparency piece has got to be front and center, which I think this is going to make a lot of headway in being able to do that by bringing all the organizations together with a similar goal.
So, Kay, I want you to go next, but then we're going to jump right after that quickly into the final design of the solution, because there are questions from the audience. I'm then going to turn it over to the audience to ask a few of the questions, and we'll also make it interactive so they can have their questions answered. But first, Kay, go ahead and share your thoughts.
So, David, there was a question in the chat, and I just wanted to chime in.
Sure.
I think it was Antoine who asked, how can economic development organizations play a role to support small businesses? And I would say they could help across the board in so many different ways, whether it's making it faster, cheaper, easier for small businesses by partnering, and on the city side, making it the restrictions and zoning, the permitting piece, they play a vital role in making those decisions on the municipal side of what that looks like for small businesses. Now, they can help on that front. They can also help with funding. Economic development organizations, they can build revolving loan funds. They can even, create funds based off of tax incentives. There's so many things that they can do. It really just takes them building the capacity and the know-how and focusing on the small business piece. Because the city of Dallas is focused on that from all fronts, I would say the community development piece, that on the economic development side, on the housing side, all of those different pieces play a part in the support for small business owners. But it really takes an out of the box approach, and sometimes looking at best and promising practices outside of Dallas. One of those things is the one-stop shop model. I've seen so many organizations try to do it, and there's still a huge miss on what that looks like, because they're not decentralizing those offerings out into the different parts of the community. And the more that you can do that and help the community be sustainable within that neighborhood and creating those one-stop shops within that neighborhood, the more you're going to build capacity for those small businesses within the communities and neighborhoods to be viable. The hub and spoke model sometimes work, but it needs funding. It needs guidelines. They need to pull the restrictions back on the permitting and zoning. And also they need to help on the capital side of supporting those entities to do the work, because it costs money to do the service delivery, not just for the BSOs, but CDCs and other community organizations who are out there doing their part. They need funding. And so that's where the economic development organizations play a huge role in making that happen.
Yeah. Well said. Tarsha, go ahead.
Antoine, you just opened up a can of worms, but I won't let a whole lot of them come out. So I do. But Kay, I mean, she hit the nail on the head. The DEC at Redbird is located in an area that is about 64% Black and Hispanic. It's the largest neighborhood in the city of Dallas. And the largest neighborhood in the city of Dallas has the largest minority population. So clearly, as you know, around the country, when you have those communities that are largely Black and Hispanic, they are under-resourced. But at the same time, here in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas, it's a food desert, right? There's not a grocery store nearby. I mean, the next grocery store is actually going to come in 2025, but it's a food desert. It's a infrastructure, it has infrastructure and broadband access issues. North of 30, there's hundreds of banks. South of 30, where Oak Cliff is, there's less than that. So it is definitely an under-resourced area. And to Kay's point, when we look at it as entrepreneurship is economic development, if we invest in revitalizing those areas, which the Redbird area is under revitalization, new businesses are coming. The Starbucks that's located there is like the second or third highest revenue generating Starbucks in the whole city. So when you bring that type of activity to the area, it's creating jobs. And the more you have that one-stop shop, which is what the DEC at Redbird is trying to be for that community, is you can come in here and get connected to resources. We are a hub with the Community Navigator program. And so for the last 2 years, we have been working through this hub and spoke model. And coming together collectively to fundraise and look at the core competencies of each of some of these ecosystem partners and saying, okay, well, you're good at X, you're good at X, let's collaborate together. Let's fundraise together to see how we can support the community in which we serve. So thank you, Kay, for going more in depth on the economic development side of that.
Yep. And I'll just add, we work with economic development agencies as our primary client. And what we found is that the most important thing we can do to help economic developers play a vital role is to educate them on the impact of supporting small and micro businesses. Because a lot of it is what we call non-sexy work. A small business doesn't make it. It doesn't give you that 500 jobs that an Amazon HQ2 brings to Dallas, right? It doesn't make headlines. But how do you show that a small business actually creates the net new jobs in the city, that they actually live and work in that community and the dollars actually get spent back in the community? All of those things are things that we need to educate economic development agencies on, to say that there is actually true ROI in supporting small businesses, and they have a critical role to play in supporting philanthropy and supporting BSOs and supporting all these other entities, because ultimately the taxpayer dollars benefit the city and the state and the federal government, and that money being reinvested in community development is actually a really good use and one of the primary areas that economic development should play in. So thank you, Antoine, for that wonderful question, and thank you all for kind of highlighting that's a critical component of the solution that we need to think about. So I'll jump a little bit into the solution itself, because I want to make sure that we don't have this discussion without actually talking about what we ended up proposing as a solution. And I'd love all of your thoughts on this. I'll kind of share the thought behind this, but Tarsha, I'd love for you to kind of talk about like the how and the what behind it. When we looked at across the ecosystem and looked at other ecosystems as well, we looked at several other markets where there is an Entrepreneur of Color Fund. We looked at the Entrepreneur of Color Fund that was established by JPMorgan Chase with $100 million that LISC helped deploy. And we looked at Washington, D.C. and New Orleans and Detroit and all these other markets. What we found, and we actually presented this back to LISC and to JPMorgan Chase, was that those funds were primarily driving capacity. And rightfully so. It was creating capacity at the CDFIs. It was creating capacity to get this into those markets. but it wasn't addressing a core data point we found in our study, which was that entrepreneur of color were being declined at a higher rate for credit score, debt to income ratio, and other factors that weren't part of the design of these other entrepreneur of color funds. So what we said was, can we actually create a solution that could uniquely test out this hypothesis that it's not the capacity that's the problem, it's the trust and the design of the solution that is a problem, and say, we might be wrong, it might be not doable, but at least we will create new solutions versus just creating more capacity, knowing that there are 9 CDFIs that service that market. Do we really need a 10th, or do we really need an additional fund that does the same thing? So that was the original design. But Tarsha, I'd kind of love for you to kind of go a little bit deeper into the mechanics of what we're designing and what that's trying to solve.
Yeah, let me just be clear. The DEC is not trying to solve it, right? Because this is a huge problem to solve for one organization and one team, right? So what the collaborative, and when I say collaborative, because and I think that's part of the reason why these gaps continue to exist, is because not enough people are coming together to solve the problem, right? It is one person or one organization trying to solve the problem. And so here in Dallas, everyone is operating in silos. We're all working on the problem, and we all have our little part of how we want to solve it. But in order to really move that needle way forward, we have to collaborate. So with this initiative, we worked with about, how many, maybe 20 plus organizations to come together to solve the problem. And so what we're designing is a loan product with the perspectives of those business support organizations, with the perspective of the CDFIs, the traditional financial institutions, as well as the entrepreneurs, right? So, I don't know about all the other studies out there, but I know that some of the ones that I've been part of, it's always been, hey, we're just gonna survey the entrepreneurs and we always get the same answer, right? But do we ever bring the entrepreneur together with all of those? And so I think that's what makes what we're doing as a collaborative unique, is that we have all the perspectives at the table and we're getting input from each one of them. The DEC is not designing this loan fund. It is the capital access collaborative, the ecosystem that is interested in changing the rules or rules of engagement. We're all coming together. So we are looking at a loan product that is going to remove some of the main barriers, such as collateral. Kay, you probably know better than I do how oftentimes the entrepreneurs will go to a CDFI or a financial institution and they don't have the collateral or enough of the collateral to match the amount they want to borrow. So we're looking at a loan fund that will remove that barrier. We're also looking at designing a loan fund that would, if the cash flow is there, just like the example I provided with the entrepreneur, he had the cash flow. He actually had the collateral. I still don't know why that man was turned down, right? And he had the credit score. I mean, his credit score was in the high 600s. But he was still turned down for some reason. And so we're looking at what are the things the banks and the CDFIs, what are those real reasons? And we're saying, hey, well, if an entrepreneur doesn't have the collateral, let's go after fundraising for that loan guarantee so that it makes it easier for a CDFI that was designed to provide funding for those underrepresented communities. It makes it easier for them to say yes, if we can provide a loan guarantee or fundraise for loan loss reserve, and therefore it's a little less riskier for that CDFI to say yes to that borrower. So those are some of the main key elements that we're looking at to somewhat change how we approach funding to those entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Tarsha. Okay, go ahead.
Tarsha's, she's correct. You know, the more that the CDFIs can reduce their own internal risk with the loan loss reserves, I think that makes for a better impact within the community, because CDFIs, they're here to make money as well. They have to be able to sustain their operations. And so just knowing that going into it, but then you also have to think about the size and the population of Dallas. Over 7 million within the MSA. One fund is not going to bring you that much impact. You need several different types of fund and different streams of capital injected within the community to really make a difference. And one of the biggest things that we're lacking right now is actually seed and venture capital. I don't know if you know, but the state of Texas was not approved for venture or seed capital, like Louisiana for the SSBCI funding. And that's the difference. But we need more BSOs, more banks and institutions to advocate for that at the state level, so we can have diversified funding within our market. And that's where we're going to make the difference, by bringing different types of capital. And most of the private dollars that are flowing through Dallas is outside capital. It's not coming from, you know, our local territory and state. And the more we can have those private dollars here, we're going to see the return on investment. But it takes that coalition building. It takes transparency, sharing the good stories of what's going on within our neighborhoods and communities for people to want to invest and make that type of investment. And the state has to know how much we care about seed and venture capital to diversify and help to diversify funding in these areas.
Since we have you, Kay, here, I'll ask one question I'm curious about. You look at Houston and you look at Austin and you look at the amount of VC capital. And if you go to Capital Factory, you see, you know, business after business that's got all this VC funding. Dallas being such a dynamic market, why isn't there local capital in Dallas? I'm just curious. I've heard this from others as well. What's missing in Dallas?
I think there are pieces of it that we can say San Antonio as well as Austin. They went after the large California tech companies way before Dallas started to. And they were like, come here. They incentivized them on the economic development side. And so when you talk about business attraction, that matters. Able to go after these big companies and bring them subsidiaries here who also play a role in economic development, community impact, funding, you know, small businesses. Dallas wasn't on the cutting edge of doing that like the other cities were. I think they realize, you know, that now, but in hindsight, you know, we're in a good place to say, how can we do this a different way? If it's not going to be from the private investment side, what can we do at the state level to also change the way we fund small businesses? And I can say this, Louisiana Economic did a great job with going out into the communities, collaborating with banks, BSOs, and asking them what they needed. They partnered with the private institutions to say, okay, we want to bring biomedical companies here. We want to be the next big state in tech. And how do we do that? And that was through the Treasury with SSBCI funding. So they made their application that they laid out their application in a way that spoke to the needs of the community. And I don't think we quite did that. And that's where I'm kind of put on my political hat. But I think we need more people to speak up about that and champion that at the state level.
Yeah, that's unique about Texas. Of all the states that we supported the SSBCI, Texas was one of the few states that did not get TA dollars, which is hard because then how do you get the loans to those micro businesses, right?
Yeah.
So we're
Technical
actually meeting. Yeah, exactly. So I'll kind of just switch tacks a little bit, just because we have people that are listening and will be listening that want to do this in their communities. Tarsha, could you kind of speak to if you went back and did this, you know, what would you change, or what were some lessons learned around the mechanics of bringing the community together? And thinking, you know, before we talk about next steps and where we're headed, you know, if we could reflect for a second, you know, what are some lessons that you've learned, both good and bad, things that you would do again, right? Things that went really well and things that, you know, you would say, okay, we could have tweaked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we did really well, and I commend the Dallas ecosystem for this, is that we have already been working together since that Next Street study in 2019. So, we already had a committed group of people coming to the table who had been working together for 5+ years. So those relationships was there. There's a certain level of trust that was already there. So I think that is what worked well, is that bringing the people to this project that were already working together, but also had boots on the ground that could give some very valuable insight. So definitely anyone out there listening, that is what really worked well for us. And I want to bring up a point in terms of lesson learned or what could be tweaked, a point that was posted in the Q&A about looking at some previous funds that were here in this area and what happened to them, what happened to it, and why it didn't continue, and what were some of the lessons learned from that fund, so that as we move forward with this one, we understand what those roadblocks or barriers were. So I think that's one thing. While many of the people that are at the table for this particular project were also part of that previous loan product during COVID. So a lot of the insight that was provided, and feedback and advice actually came from people who were a part of some of the previous loan products and programs out there. So, but I think that's one thing to tweak is, it's a lesson learned, but at the same time, it shows how as an ecosystem, there's still gaps, because we as ecosystem partners aren't all of us are not aware of all the loan products and funds that are out there. And so that there means we have to continue to have these conversations and bring everyone to the table so that everyone is knowledgeable and aware. So I would say that would be a lesson learned, is just having better knowledge and understanding of what is already out there, or what was out there, and why it did or did not work. You're muted.
Thank you. I was hoping I'll go through this whole presentation without doing it once, but there you go. Lasted an hour. So Holly, you're next. You were part of this. I don't know if you're part of the previous studies, but definitely this one, you've been part of the entire one as part of the task force. What is something, as you reflect back, that you would say was an aha moment for you, or something that you would do differently?
What I do differently, and I was part of the prior work as well, and I do think that one thing that we did better this time than the last time was, I think we had more involvement from the community. And I don't know whether that simply came from, this is an iterative process where it began and people started paying attention, and now more people are wanting to be involved in the work, or maybe just timing is kismet and it just simply worked that way. I don't know exactly what the root cause of that is, but I think that this time we did have a lot more involvement, and that was very exciting to me, because I can remember being on meetings from the prior work and there would be just a handful of us on there. There were just a few people doing the work, and then every now and again other people would pop in just to see what was going on. But this process has been much more heavily attended and much more involved with all the different players within the community.
And I think part of it was also everybody realizing that we do want to see change, and the fact that we're willing to do something that is very different versus come up with the same solution. From the very beginning, we messaged that saying that we're not looking to gain more insights. From the very beginning, we said this time around, we kind of know what the problem is. Asking more questions doesn't give you news problem. The problem is there. So we were very determined in the communication to say this time around and Tarsha has told me that in the very, very first meeting. She's like, listen, I know we have to do the study, but the study is only a baseline. We want to solve this problem. And that's the only motivation we all have. And I think that messaging really helped me. Like I'm with you. Every convening, the room was full. Like everybody showed up to every single convening. The final one in May had over 100 people. Every seat was taken in the room. It was fantastic. And I think it's that motivation that people want to see change in the community. And if you can message well, I think it rallies the troops. So I think that was well said. Kay, I know you've been watching from the outside, but looking in, what has stood out for you?
I would say looking in, because I had a chance to study some of this work prior to coming on to True Fund. It's just the tracking of the sustainability for small businesses. Once they get a loan, how well do we track their sustainability? Are they in existence for 3 to 4 years, 8 to 10 years, or are they in need of more services now? I think that is a huge gap that we need to close. And I think we've learned from the PPP, even now, some of those businesses weren't appropriately tracked. And so circling back, how do we as a community track our own viability for opening and closing businesses to close the gap there? With this fund, how are we going to track the opening, the closings, the mergers? We need to be able to track that and tell the story. Did the funding help them? Historically, I've seen this across the nation. That has not been done in a way that is increasing the lifespan of a business. And that's what we want to do. We want businesses to be here, for 8 to 10, 20 years. And we can only do that if we understand what's happening to them on the ground and like in real time. Like what are not just, during a disaster or an emergency, but what's going in their personal, what's going on in their everyday business lives that we can do and understand what we can do to change that and help them.
Yep. So as we kind of wrap this up, I would love to have you kind of talk about, Tarsha, where are we headed next? And what can people that are following, and I know there's a lot of slowly from being Dallas interest or Texas interest to now national interest on this work, what can people expect next in terms of where this project is headed?
Yeah, so phase 1 of this project was really the study itself, which we presented at the May 2nd convening to the Dallas ecosystem. And so since May, the work is continuing. We have many of those same ecosystem builders and partners at the table, and we have broken up into many committees and task force. So we have a committee that's focused on who are the trusted connectors and how do we engage them? How do we connect with them? So we have one committee working on building that list and outreach to those trusted connectors. We also have a committee focused on the CDFIs. For those of you who received the white paper, you'll see that over 50% of the nonprofit lenders, which are the CDFIs, turn down entrepreneurs of color. So we have a whole task force around better understanding, digging deeper, interviewing and talking to each of those CDFIs to learn about their loan products and what the criteria is. And then we have committees around business support. And this is not just business support for the entrepreneur, because we kind of know what they need. This also focuses on what TA does the BSOs or ESOs need around a loan fund, to better educate them on how to vet, to train, and refer entrepreneurs to this loan fund. So that's where we currently are, with the goal of these small groups coming back in late August saying, they all have action items, they all have deliverables, and they're coming back in late August to say, here's the list of trusted connectors that we want to start with. Here are the different types of entrepreneur of color funds or funds available that target that audience, so that we can evaluate and say, well, this organization is already doing it. This organization is already doing it. How can we come together and create a unified solution? So that's what that committee is coming back with. And then finally on the outreach or committee is how are we going to get the word out? So our goal is that's phase 2 of it. Hopefully to get those action items by late August, early September. And then phase 3, and while we're in phase 2, we are looking at these community partners who want to come together to collaborate, to fundraise together. This is a huge initiative, and Kay mentioned it before. A hub and spoke model works when you have the right people coming together and you have the right kind of product or program that you can come together to go to foundations, go to CRA officers to get funding for this initiative. So that's all part of phase 2. And then phase 3 is really rolling out this unique affordable loan fund during the first quarter of 24.
All right. So this is really exciting. As we wrap up, I'm going to ask Holly for you to go first. If you had like one success metric from this project, saying that we can't solve for all, if we have to solve for one, I'll ask the same question to you, Kay. Then Tarsha, I'll let you have the final word on as we wrap things up. Like, what will success look like? Let's say we did another webinar 6 months from now, and we looked back and said, okay, what does progress look like? So Holly, to you first.
So I actually want to sort of double click onto what Kay mentioned prior to this. Is like, for me, success would be understanding how to start tracking what is the long-term impact of this, and are we actually building tools along this journey to be able to engage with these entrepreneurs, not just at the exciting beginning part, but throughout that process, and what are we building to sort of accompany and support this process that isn't money, because we know that the money is essential, but the money isn't everything. And obviously the tools that we've been building previously are not all working. So sort of re-envisioning that and understanding how do we carry that support process along with that journey of that loan. So if it's a 3 to 5 year loan, we want to be with them the whole way through. How are we tracking that success? So for me, success would be understanding how we're going to be able to carry that through the life of that loan with that business owner.
Well said. Kay?
For me, it would be the packaging piece, because I'm a CDFI, and I think for us, partnering with institutions who could help pre-package small business documents, I think that would be a win, not just for my institution, but other institutions across the board. The better we can get a grasp on that, I think we'll have win-win situations with all financial institutions who are servicing in the Dallas area.
And Tarsha?
Yes, so short-term success would look like we have a fully funded loan fund. And that's what short-term success would look like. I mean, we've done the research, we're doing these meetings for a reason, is to launch a loan fund. And so that means that we've raised the $5 million that we're looking to invest into this loan fund. So that's what short-term success looks like for me. Long-term success, a year from now, a couple of years from now, is that since this study, we did focus on certain zip codes in the southern sector of Dallas. I think it's important to bring that to light. Because that is an area of Dallas that is under-resourced. And while there's all areas in the DFW Metroplex that entrepreneurs need support, we want to focus on the southern sector, because we can make a huge impact. We can bring additional resources to that area. So more long-term success looks like for me is that in that area, we have 50 to 100 entrepreneurs funded, that we have new businesses started in that area. And not only new businesses started, but those businesses have resources that they need to sustain. So for me, that's the short and the long-term success of this project.
And I'll go one step further. I would love for us, after we've launched this fund, to prove our hypothesis that there are businesses that are fundable and should be funded that haven't been funded because of the mechanics of how we decided who gets funded. That if we could prove in the Dallas market that with a better design, we can reach more people of color and more businesses in general, we can actually then take this and bring this to other markets that have the exact same problem. St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, all of these markets that we're in, we see the same challenges. But we need somebody to raise their hand and say, we'll go first and we'll prove that this is doable. So I'm really excited for Dallas's story and what you've all set out to do. And I'm excited to have front row seat to see this journey play out. I'd like to thank you all, Tarsha, Holly, and Kay, for your insights and for your time today, and for sharing your experiences and your lessons learned. This is going to be invaluable in at least starting the conversations in several other markets that have the same challenges today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, David, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our attendees. We will end this meeting now.
Bye-bye.